Welcome to another episode of the West Coast Offensive. I'm your host, Kyle Dewhurst, and this week we got some fun stuff to talk about. We're going to be breaking down the NBA playoffs, the games that concluded, the series that have concluded this past week. We're going to look at the Clippers in Utah, Atlanta, and Philadelphia, and in a special segment, Drew, our forever guest, is going to join us. The prodigal son returns. He's going to join us and talk the Milwaukee Bucks, or the Milwaukee and the Brooklyn series, talk about Game 7, and preview the Atlanta Hawks and the Milwaukee series that is starting. I think it'll already have started by the time you listen to this. So it'll be fun to have him join us. Then we'll look at the NFL, talking about some headlines over there. We'll talk about that when we get there. But first, let's head back to our first segment at the top of the order. Let's talk about some basketball, baby. Let's talk about some basketball. All right, welcome back. So, talking about the first series, we had the LA Clippers go against the Utah Jazz. The Clippers winning that series 4-2. I had completely written off the Clippers. I expected the same thing to happen. That happened last season, to happen this season, just collapse. They didn't look like a team that wanted to play. They weren't ready for the playoffs, whatever you want to say. I expected that from them. I thought Utah was going to win this series. Maybe it's close, but overall, I expected Utah. I was wrong, and now Utah has a lot of question marks going forward. Can they run it back, or what can they do to avoid a similar fate next season? But the Clippers, even without Kawhi Leonard, won this series 4-2. A breath of fresh air was breathed into them, it seemed, after the Lakers went out, honestly. And here they are, winning tough games against Dallas first in that first series, and now against number one Utah. We'll see. I got not much to say about the Clippers. I don't think they win against Phoenix. Phoenix is up 1-0 as of right now. That's probably going to change by the time you listen to this. But I mean, if Leonard can get back out there and can play at a high level, I think this will have a series. But ultimately, without Leonard right now, I think the Suns are just a better team. But hey, it's exciting to see the Clippers not collapse. So hey, good for them. Good for the second LA team to try not to become the second LA team. Also, it would be fun just to see Lakers fans start questioning a lot if the Clippers go on to win the finals, even just make the finals, as the Lakers were a first round exit, just to hear them complain, hear them say all the excuses they would give to the Lakers. Well, the season, there was no off season for the Lakers. Like, well, you guys all knew that. You signed up for it. Anyways, so that's series. Clippers move on, and right now, like I said before, they're facing the Phoenix Suns. And I like Devin Booker. I like Phoenix. They're my pick still. They've been playing so well, just so well, and I think that's going to continue against the Clippers. So they'll move on. That's still my pick going forward. I don't think Clippers moving on changes anything for me. But let's talk about the other game on the other side. In the Eastern Conference, we had Atlanta going against number one Philadelphia, and Atlanta made this a series. We talk about this a little bit with Drew in the next segment, so you'll hear a little bit about that game and what Drew thinks about Philadelphia and why things don't work, Ben Simmons. But ultimately, I just want to shout out to Trae Young for making this series and this playoffs good. It's been fun to have this type of young player step into the spotlight and own it. Going back to the New York Knicks, which I've said multiple times, he became a villain to them, just boos at Madison Square Garden. He lived into it. He egged them on. He played that role well, and they went on to win that series. And then similar thing in Atlanta, he against Philadelphia, he willed this team past the Philadelphia 76ers. And ultimately, I don't know what's going on in Philadelphia. They don't got a lot of shooters, even their defense is okay, better defense than most teams, but ultimately it's just, what do you have with Embiid and Simmons? So I love that Trae Young has moved on. The Atlanta Hawks have moved on, going up against Milwaukee. That game airs tomorrow at the time of recording, so you probably will know the outcome of that game by the time you listen to it. But right now the series is 0-0, so we don't know what we're going to get out of that. But I'm excited. I would love, and I say this in the next segment, I would love to see Atlanta move on to the finals as a 5 seed. Just, it's exciting. Trae Young emerges in the playoffs, has some great performances, and defeats Milwaukee. who just overcame a 7-game series against Brooklyn, who inches away from winning that series, and to go down to Atlanta. It'd just be exciting and a fun story to see Trae Young do that behind that team. Ultimately, I don't think that happens, though. And we talk about that series and what to look for in our next segment, which we will go to right now. Remember, Drew, our forever guest, is joining us. So enjoy that conversation, and I'll see you after. Welcome back, everybody. So we are now joined by Drew, going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks defeating the Brooklyn Nets in a 7-game series. Oh, great series. So, Drew, to get us started, I want to hear about what you saw in this series out of Milwaukee and what you see coming out of them going forward versus the Hawks. So give us your breakdown of the series we just watched.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the best games, let alone one of the best series I think that you're ever going to see. I think you could argue this is one of the best playoff runs that the NBA has had in a while. Top down. The bubble was phenomenal as well. But just when you look at some of these favorite teams like the Lakers, the Clippers being hurt now, like the Nets now losing in the second round, like the 76ers being beat by an underdog Hawks team as well. You're seeing a lot of the favorites not make it through. And I think that that's creating a couple of amazing 7-game series in the first and second round, which is not something that we always get to see. And I think it's just creating a lot more drama because of that, right? So the Bucks series was a one. You know, I was not feeling great, obviously, after game 2. I think most people didn't have a ton of reason to be. And a lot of people might be saying that this whole thing, you know, fell on Kyrie Irving being injured. And I will get to game 7 in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about the series first. Like, look, Kyrie Irving gets injured. That's what he does. If you you can't be surprised by that, right? Like if you sign with DeAndre Jordan and then you get mad that he can't hit free throws, like, yeah, that's your fault. Like Kevin Durant knew what he was doing when he teamed up with Kyrie freaking Irving. Okay. With Mr. Flat Earth, I don't want to play Kyrie Irving. You got what you thought you were going to get. James Harden, you can talk about him being hobbled all you want. Guess what? He does not show up in the playoffs, and especially doesn't show up in game 7s historically. So that's all fine and well. Also, being available, being healthy is part of this. To also mention the fact that none of these 3 guys played super long extended minutes in the bubble last year, right? So if you're a Donovan Mitchell or someone, you have a much better case at fatigue being a case here, right? So it was just something that I didn't totally buy. You can totally say, like, I'll be the first one to say that on paper the Nets are clearly the better team. No one's denying that. Like all these Nets fans that are so pissy about the refs or the injuries or what, like no one's saying that your team isn't infinitely better on paper, but you played to win the game, in the words of Herm Edwards, and the Bucks played to win the game. What I did love, Mike Budenholzer, the Bucks head coach, this is his 3rd season, has continually let leads go in the playoffs, has lost games. I've always been kind of on this stage where it's like, well, how much is him? How much is Giannis not being able to carry this team? This series showed what the Bucks can be. Chris Middleton stepped up in a huge way after being a complete no-show in games 1 and 2, turned it on, was a complete all-star performer in the rest of the series, especially in the games at home. And even in game 7, maybe didn't play great in the first 3 quarters, but in the 4th quarter and in overtime when it mattered, he was the one that hit big shots. Drew Holiday didn't perform as well offensively as you would like. There were a lot of people comparing him to Eric Bledsoe. He's so much better for so many different reasons. As a better defender too. So like they still wouldn't have got this far without Drew Holiday, even though he didn't necessarily shoot super well from 3, right? Even from 2. What we ended up seeing, though, was that Mike Budenholzer, for the first time really in his career, even going all the way back to Atlanta, made playoff adjustments. And people may not see this, but last year, Giannis did not play more than 36 minutes in a playoff game. He was playing 45, 46 minutes in these games. Now, Kevin Durant's playing 48, right? But the minutes alone drastically changed what this team looked like. Giannis went from shooting 8 threes in a game 5 loss, believe maybe it was game Yeah, game 5 lost to shooting 0 in game 6, right?
Yeah.
And then I think he only shot 1 or 2 in game 7, and he made one, right? So it was a big shift in how they were playing this, and everybody on social media and every NBA show, podcast, or what across the country saying Giannis, stop shooting threes. They have nobody to stop you inside. Go inside. Once you finally listen to it, they won. The Nets this year had a couple major factors going against them. One being chemistry, which clearly showed up in this playoff series. One being the fact that they had no inside defensive presence to stop somebody like Joel Embiid or to stop Giannis. That is ultimately why they lost the series. And that was evident. And we can even look back to a team like the Miami Heat, who were healthier and didn't win their first year with LeBron James. Like, it is difficult to win a championship even when you have 3 Hall of Fame players on the same court. At the same time, Kevin Durant is less than an inch away from winning this game with a hell of a shot. Anybody that wants to say like, well, and he airballed in the overtime, he played every second of that game. He's exhausted. He is so talented. Like, yeah, he had everything that he could have possibly done in that game to get the Nets over that. So I have even though I don't love Kevin Durant as a person, I give him the utmost credit in the world for the player that he is. I think right this second he is the best player in the NBA given what he just did. And it's not like the Bucks were playing bad defense either. He was making 3 after 3 when he had PJ Tucker tackling him basically, right? So so excited for the Bucks going forward. I did not think they were going to be able to pull this out, especially at a game 7 in Brooklyn. The fact that they did makes me so excited. I think that they've cured a lot of their demons. I think Chris Middleton has turned himself into a clutch player, which he was not always. I think Giannis understands his role better in the playoffs, what he needs to do in the playoffs for this team to win going forward, and especially going up against a Hawks team, which is tremendously talented, has some great 3-point shooting. I don't think that they have enough top end talent to compete with the Bucks, but I still think it's going to be a 6 or 7 game series. I think it's going to be a dog fight till the end. There's a lot of Bucks fans saying this is going to be over in 4 or 5. I hope I would not take the Hawks that lightly at this point in time.
No, it's what Trae Young is doing with that team is crazy, right? He's making a case for solidifying himself into the conversation of elite players currently playing right now, and it's exciting to see. He's the superstar right now in Atlanta, and I love an underdog, so I would love to see them take down the Milwaukee Bucks and then move on to the finals just because it's a good story. But you made a lot of good points about the Bucks, and that was one thing I was worried about with the Bucks and why I went with Brooklyn, just because they were more star-studded and just they played a little better over the course of the season, in my opinion. But Milwaukee overcame those issues they had in previous years, overcame the lack of coaching changes like you addressed. And that was something that I'm happy you did, because I was wondering, like, how much did they change game to game in this series? Because they look different. And I think ultimately, I think, yeah, that's the reason they won, because they didn't have a chance. Brooklyn couldn't stop Giannis inside. Why is he shooting threes on the outside, And clearly that's what it comes down to and why they won. And going back to that Durant shot, man, like, yeah, you got to give him the respect. Like, he played his ass off, and he was literally a shoe size away from winning that game instead of sending it to overtime. And then, yeah, his airball, who cares? It was funny. It's like, of course he's gonna airball, like he's exhausted, and a way to go for the win though. Like, you want to play another quarter right now? No one wanted to play another quarter. So, it is what it is. And I think Brooklyn going forward can be really good if those 3 actually play together, because they didn't play at all in the regular season outside of maybe a couple minutes. But
7 games.
Oh, okay. So there's that. But after that they've been riddled with injuries, and yeah, I think that ultimately does hinder the team. But like you said, Kyrie has always been injured, right? That's kind of what you sign up for. You know who James Harden is. Blake Griffin was a surprise. That's cool to see him kind of become something to be utilized again. So we'll see. I'm excited to see what Brooklyn does next year. I'm more intrigued by the Knicks though, to see if they can keep it up. But talking now Atlanta, you said 4 to 5. You would love 4 to 5, but yeah, I think we're gonna get I would love a 7-game series just to see what Trae Young could do in the spotlight with a clearly, I think they are the underdogs going up against Milwaukee. I think people would love to see a tough series, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Milwaukee steamroll over them. But the way they're just hot right now, got to keep your eye on them. It's going to be a fun series to watch.
Yeah, I think the Hawks match up pretty well with the Bucks overall. I think Trae Young has proved a lot of critics wrong, and it's also really justified that Luka Doncic draft day trade. I mean, the Hawks are being killed on that. And looking at it now, yeah, I think everybody would still take Luka over Trae Young in a vacuum, but it's a lot closer than what it appeared to be, especially in their rookie season, right? I do think the Hawks have a tremendously balanced team. Clint Capella is a solid player. John Collins, I think, is one of the most underrated players in this league. He does absolutely everything for you. They're loaded with shooters. That's the biggest concern to me, is that I think the Hawks are more consistent from the 3-point line. But the Bucks are also a much better defensive team than I think the 76ers are, top to bottom. With the even. And we can talk about how like Giannis isn't a great shooter. Well, he's better than Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
And it's not like the Hawks do deserve credit for winning this series, right? Like, I'm not trying to say that they don't deserve to be here. If you win the series, you deserve to be there. Even in a game 7 where Trae Young can't shoot, he's still assisting the players and willing that team to victory. So like, that's awesome. This whether you want to put the blame on Doc or Ben Simmons or whoever else within the 76ers or organization, it's frankly the same thing that happened with the Clippers in last year's playoffs, right? Which is why I think a lot of people tend to say this is Doc's fault, because he blows leads in individual games and in series constantly. But I think when you look at these games, it comes down to Simmons. Now so many people are trained, you have to trade Simmons now. They even asked Doc after the game, can you win a championship with Ben Simmons as the point guard? And Doc said, I don't know. That's not something a head coach says. You know, like, if you have any confidence, you say yes. To build up that player.
Well,
but
even Joel Embiid said something too about it. They asked him, and he's like, "Well, you know, we had an open shot and we didn't do it. What can I say? Like, what can I say?" Referencing that one dunk that Simmons should have had and passed out. You know, it's just so What does Simmons, is he there? Yeah, it's really interesting.
And that's the bigger issue, is not that he won't shoot, but that he's scared to shoot. And the fact that, look, you can be an all-world defender, that's great. But unless you are going to construct that entire roster the way that the Bucks have constructed a roster around Giannis, where you have shooters at every position, like, it's just not going to work. Especially him and Embiid on the court at the same time does not work when you can't have him in the fourth quarter. But still, if you have an 18-point lead in the second half of a game, you should win that game. This is why I said the Clippers, even though they blew 3 gigantic leads last year, are a better team than the Nuggets were. The Nuggets just played better in this series, right? It's the same thing here. The 76ers have significantly more talent. You don't get a 18-point lead in the second half repeatedly over and over and over again without being the more talented team, but they can't close. They've never been able to close. And when you're relying on Joel Embiid, who gets hurt, and Ben Simmons, who can't shoot, like, I'm not saying they have to blow the entire team up, but they have reached, and you probably could have said this 2 seasons ago, they've reached their ceiling with what this processed 76ers team can be. The Sam Hinkie, origin of this team, it has reached its ceiling, which is the second round, going to a game 7 of the NBA, or of the Eastern Conference playoffs. They can't even get to an Eastern Conference final.
No. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because I agree with everything you said. Well, I don't want to take more of your time. You got anything else about Milwaukee, except the fact that you were predicting them to get onto the finals?
Yeah, and I mean, like I said to you, like that was more of a, not necessarily a homer pick, but I mean, definitely wishful thinking. I did like the matchup versus the Nets with Giannis. I mean, that was before, you had Harden get hurt and Kyrie get hurt. I will say though that, the Nets are still going to be the favorite going into next year's regular season, and I get that, and they probably should be. At the same time, it's just you have three players now that are getting injured more and more often, and I wonder what that's going to look like in the Eastern Conference next year. I hope the Knicks are able to get some sort of star. Maybe they're able to get Dame there. I think the Hawks are on the up and up. But really, overall, like it should be the Nets conference. As long as they can make the necessary offseason moves, and if they can stay healthy, like that's up.
All right, yeah. If Dame moves, that's going to shake up a lot, but I don't think he does. But thanks for coming on and talking Milwaukee and previewing that Hawks Bucks series. We'll be watching that, and hey, hopefully our picks for finals can go through. So far, Phoenix has been rolling, and Milwaukee is going too. So we'll see if we can get our final picks to be perfect, because that'd be kind of cool. Anyways, when we come back, we'll talk NFL. But now let's talk NFL. Yesterday, 21st of June, Carl Nassib, Las Vegas Raiders defensive end. So it's one reason why I want to talk about this, but also for what happened. It's important. Carl Nassib posted on his Instagram story that he is gay, and subsequently, I figured it out. Subsequently, donates $100,000 to the Trevor Project, which focuses on suicide prevention and general help for LGBTQ youth. And ultimately, on the football side, he's an okay player. He didn't get a lot of numbers last year on the Raiders. Hoping he can improve that, especially with a revamped defensive line, be a good rotational player. It's $9 million guaranteed for his contract, so he's probably going to be on the team. I don't think that he was ever going to be cut. He was a free agent brought in to help that defensive line, which didn't work last season. So he's going to be on the team, and he's an okay player. I hope he improves, just because he's on the Raiders. So why wouldn't I want him to get better? Obviously, though, the main thing of this is now him coming out to everyone, being the first active NFL player to come out as gay, and just the amount of support from current players and past players and coaches has been overwhelmingly positive. And ultimately, I mean, why wouldn't it be? I thought it was really interesting. A lot of former players, not naming names, as in, they haven't named anyone, obviously, because that's not okay. But former players have talked about that. They've been in locker rooms, they've played with players, had teammates who were gay, who didn't feel like they could come out in the time they were playing. So the fact that now someone can, and they're met with so much positive energy and so much positive feedback is good. And it's good going forward, as it's 2021, guys. Like, it doesn't matter if he could play ball, he could play ball. It's not an issue to me, and it shouldn't be really to anyone. So even Nassib, in his video, he comments, he's like, hopefully we get to a point where these type of videos aren't met with congratulations and stuff, and these types of videos aren't needed. And I think that's this is a step there. So it's really, really cool. I'll ultimately, like, I was a part of this Facebook group. I'm not going to name it, obviously. It actually got shut down on Facebook, which is funny. But just NFL stuff, there's a lot of people who don't want to be inclusive. And at the end of the day, that's dumb. Sports is something that should be inclusive. The whole idea of having a team, especially with football, like, you put everything outside away and you come to play ball, and you come to win games, right? And as fans, like, no, let's come to support the team. We don't need to be derogatory and homophobic, which I saw a lot of. So hopefully, as a whole, this helps sports kind of stop that, because I think that's why a lot of people have issues with sports, is it can sometimes be a boys club. But that's just my personal experience and why I avoid certain groups. But anyways, so obviously, congratulations. I don't even know what the right thing to say is, but it's a good thing. So shout out to Carl Nassib for doing this. It takes courage and some bravery to come out, especially when you're not fully aware and fully sure, not fully aware, but not fully sure of what the reception could be within a football league professionally. And I mean, I've seen some pretty horrible comments from fans. So, that's all known, and just props to him for doing it. And hopefully this starts a trend of just more acceptance overall. Just wanted to shout him out. But let's move on to our next topic, which is Tom Brady. All right. Also, yesterday on Monday, more sports news broke. Kind of gossipy news. On Monday, HBO's show The Shop, which is a TV show produced by LeBron James and Maverick Carter, where they're in a barbershop and they just talk. It's really good. Watch it if you have HBO Max. They tweeted a promo of its new season where Brady calls out an anonymous team. I'm going to read this quote from him from the promo that they posted. One of the teams, they weren't interested at the very end, Brady says. I was thinking, you're sticking with that mother effer. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? He's talking about free agency, and apparently there was a team that just wasn't interested at the end, decided they did not want Tom Brady, and this is his response, saying, you're sticking with that mother effer. Now, I think this is super interesting, and obviously a lot of people started speculating, who is he talking about? This article says, Titans, Chargers, Bears, Rams, all were reportedly trying to get him. Obviously, Patriots and Bucks ultimately got him. If Raiders were thrown in there, 49ers were thrown in there. So who is he talking about? Is he talking about Garoppolo? Wow, you really want to stick with Garoppolo? Is it... Chargers at the time of free agency, they had Tyrod Taylor. So is he talking about Tyrod Taylor? Bears, Andy Dalton, or whoever else was there? Nick Foles. He's questioning that. Ultimately, obviously, this doesn't matter. And this is just one of those fun stories to talk about in a limited, in a time where there's limited actual NFL stories. But I think it is interesting to see. And the show comes out this Friday, which would be, if it's the 21st, pulling up my calendar, the 25th, comes out on the 25th. So maybe we'll get more insight into what team he is talking about there. Maybe it's all just a big trick where he just laughs and he's like, nah, I'm just kidding. Overall, it'll be interesting to see who he says. I don't think, like I said, it doesn't matter, but it's a funny thing for Tom Brady to say, and a funny thing that the internet latched onto, and now as everyone's wondering, who is that mother effer that he's talking about? Well, that is going to conclude another episode of the West Coast Offensive. Thank you to our forever guest, Drew Ajer, for joining us again to talk about some basketball. And remember, you can catch the show on all podcast listening services such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, and a slew of others. Just find us by looking for the West Coast Offensive and following us on your preferred one. On Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a 5-star review or any review, but I would prefer 5 stars. Leaving a review definitely helps us get discovered and helps people find us. So I think I said the same thing in different ways. Either way, it helps us get discovered. So if you have Apple or if you use that platform and you want to do that for us, that'd be super phenomenal, and I appreciate it. Another way you can support us is by heading over to our YouTube channel and subscribing there and clicking the notification bell to be alerted whenever new content goes up. I'll post a full video version of the podcast there. So if you prefer to see some faces along with the words, head over there and watch it there and leave some comments on the content. If you agree or disagree on anything, you can do all that there. So remember, head to YouTube. That's the West Coast Offensive on YouTube, and just subscribe and find us. You can also like us on Facebook at the West Coast Offensive to stay up to date on episode releases, and on Twitter and on Instagram. Not a lot of content pushing out to those platforms, but hoping to ramp that up in the coming weeks. So head over there, just look up West Coast Offensive, find that bear logo, like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform the necessary thing is to click. If it says follow, follow. If it says like, do those over there. And last but not least, if you want to support the show, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com /the West Coast off. Buy Me a Coffee is a platform for supporters where you can support people and support content creators making stuff by simply buying them a coffee. Super cool premise, super cool site. Love them. So remember, you can go there at buymeacoffee.com/the West Coast off to support us. Thanks again for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, stay kind, spread that kindness, and stay safe.